not only the best Scotsman since Braveheart, but one of the early champions of the... I began to champion what is now the NDIS and to support people with a disability and to actually protect all Australians. As Parliamentary Secretary for Disabilities, I, along with Jenny Macklin, Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard, with many grassroots campaigners, disability service providers, carers and advocates, we all worked together to design the scheme and to get the NDIS Act passed in 2013. I'd like to give a special acknowledgement to Doogie Hurd, not only the best Scotsman since Braveheart, but one of the early champions of the scheme from the disability community. The creation of the NDIS was a last volley from an era of big public ideas. I believe it is difficult to name another reform of this scale proposed, let alone achieved, since then. Too often, political endeavour is the field of failed dreams. Politics is strewn with the good intentions of good people, from the left and from the right, but all too often little is accomplished. The NDIS is the exception to this in the last decade. Today, the NDIS stands as a great reform because it provides support to people with severe and permanent disabilities based upon their individual needs. Today, there are 430,000 NDIS participants, 212,000 of whom are receiving supports for the first time. Today, as a result of Labor's vision and foresight, the NDIS now stands alongside Medicare as a key foundation of a fair and decent society. Like Medicare, the NDIS is a universal insurance scheme. It promises if you or your child or your grandchild is born with or acquires a disability, then the NDIS will be there to provide tailored support based on individual needs. Medicare looks after you when you're sick, but the NDIS is there when the condition is permanent. The NDIS could have only been created by a Labor government. And as we are discovering, it can only be run properly by a Labor government. In fact, we are learning in real time that expecting a Liberal government to properly manage a scheme like the NDIS is a bit like expecting a duck to be able to play a Stradivarius violin. If you study your political history, you see it. It is the parties of Labor and Social Democrats who deliver the big nation-building projects, the civilising institutions, the parties of the great generous safety nets that raise us all up and protect our people from entropy and destitution. In Australia, it is only Labor who could have given us the minimum wage, Medicare, superannuation and the NDIS. And despite the Australian people's fondness for these achievements, the Liberal Party's ideological war against the generous safety net never sleeps. So the tragedy of the NDIS, as I've said, is in its timing. We passed the legislation in 2013. Labor lost government the same year. And it has been the Abbott, Turnbull and Morrison show ever since. So what we got at the birth of this great, unique, world-beating national disability scheme, and in its infancy at the time when it needed to be cared for, nurtured and rolled out across Australia, has been a bad babysitter in the form of successive Liberal governments that were at best ambivalent about the scheme and too often hostile to its existence since. Now, we had hoped we would be in power to roll out the scheme, to react to the unforeseen consequences in this bold national endeavour and to improve it wherever necessary. Instead, the NDIS has been chaperoned by the cavalier vandalism of successive Liberal governments. After 8 years of neglect and 7 different ministers for disability, I am sorry to say that the ongoing existence of the scheme as we dreamed it to be is at risk. Under the Morrison government, it is presently at risk from neglect and, worse, direct attack. Initially, we secured for the invisible people of Australia, people with disability and carers, a reasonable degree of bipartisanship from the Abbott opposition. But the current government, because it wasn't actually their idea, they simply don't believe in its proper maintenance. It is sadly not overstating things to say that in 2021, the NDIS has the front door padlocked to the genuinely needy, but the back door is wide open for crooks and profiteers. Sadly, it is not overstating things in 2021 to say that NDIS participants are dying in their homes due to agency neglect and a sleepy watchdog that has not properly been put to work. It is not overstating things to say that those in charge at a ministerial and agency level have been more concerned with data points than people, that they are too secretive, that there is too much of a closed shop, a black box dealing with the key numbers and evidence, and this approach is killing trust. It is not too much to say that they are in a mad rush to trade a vital public service for a human-free robo-system, and to do so regardless of the damage and seemingly at too high a price. Let us consider this ideological zeal, for instance, and how the controversial compulsory ind-assessments plan has come about. First step, what are independent compulsory assessments? The Morrison government want 430,000 plus Australian participants who've already proven, supported by expert medical and allied health professional advice and lived experience, that they are sufficiently disabled to be on the NDIS. They want these people to prove it all again, to reapply, to try to re-qualify for a scheme under their new guidelines. It is privatisation by stealth. Now, there are several glaring problems with this. The so-called independent assessments are not independent at all. They are robo-planning from the government who brought us robo-debt. And as with robo-debt, robo-planning is based on flawed mathematical algorithms. There is no evidence that independent compulsory assessments are a great idea. It has been constructed in a black box. And the disability community fear it and detest it legitimately. I mean, so how do you steamroll in such a thing? A thing that no one wants, a thing that lacks sense. Well, what the Liberals have done here is a masterclass in scruples-free governing. Here is their guide to steamrolling and unwanted changes. First of all, hold one rushed sham pilot and one incomplete pilot scheme. Then report back before even that pilot is finished. They were a raging success and everyone loves the new proposed system. This part of the Liberal plan hit a bit of a brick wall when Labor was able to reveal the radical changes for more than 400,000 Australians on the NDIS was based on a pilot involving fewer than 40 actual NDIS participants. So now, what do? Let's have a new pilot scheme. But it is clear that the Morrison government intend that they know the answer to what it's to be because they've already signed the contracts with their mates in big consultancy to roll out a new system. Why are they signing the contracts if they... why are they having the second trial if they've already given the contracts for the assessment? Now, in fairness, this was all under the reign of the 6th Minister for Disability, Stuart Robert, not the current Minister. The next step in scruples-free government is to get an independent review of what needs to be done to improve the NDIS and hope that your plan miraculously